Hey everybody, and welcome to Armoured Brownies. I'm Hayes, the master meat human behind Armoured Brownies, full of my own organs. Now I'm going to sit here and guide you through one of my most ambitious sculpts yet. I know every single time we come to one of these sculpts, I end up saying, this is something new, I learned lots of new things. That's because genuinely, every time I sculpt something new, you learn something. Every time you will sculpt something or build something new, you'll learn something new. And this sculpt is probably as or more ambitious than my Groot sculpt, which is really weird to say since this is all really straight lines and a predictable scale pattern over it, whereas Groot, I think Groot was actually a bit bigger. However, I'm not going to go on about Groot too much since I haven't done a video on him and he was sculpted before I started recording everything, so all I have are a bunch of work in progress photos of him. So at some point I will sit down and walk you through Groot since Groot wants to be a full costume, whereas this isn't going to be a full costume for me, this is actually going to a friend. So for those who aren't familiar, this is Madame Vastra from Doctor Who, and this is done as a commission for a friend who managed to get access to the original prosthetics at the Doctor Who workshop, at the Doctor Who live show thing, at the Doctor Who sort of studios, and they took a 3D scan of her head. So I actually had a 3D model to actually look at, although it wasn't very good resolution because this is the 123D app or the Thingiverse app. I can't actually remember who actually makes it, but it's not too good a quality. But there's plenty of actual like screenshots from the show, behind the scenes stuff. In fact, on this shot you can actually see a behind the scenes shot of how the original prosthetic goes together. And you can see me trying to copy and lay down the basic foundations around this plaster cast head. This is of course a plaster cast head of my other half, so it's quite amusing sculpting around their face. Now, you can see me going over it with a lot of water at some points to try and keep the whole thing smooth and keep the surface wet, because this was about 3 weeks worth of sculpting. With water-based clay, you have to be incredibly careful not to let it dry out. When the position of the camera jumps, when we go between different scenes, different instances, overnight, between my sculpting sessions, I'll be wrapping the sculpt in cling film and putting a plastic bag over it after wetting the whole thing down, so all the water in it doesn't evaporate and it doesn't crack and get dry and I lose all of the detail. Now, with a sculpt like this, you really want to make sure you've got all of your anatomy down solid, because that's the biggest overall challenge, of getting the anatomy correct to make sure the whole thing comes together. And then it's a case of putting all the details in, since a scaled creature is all quite smooth shapes and then a regular nice scale pattern over it. Even though the scale pattern is the thing that will take you the time, the actual anatomy and basic physiology of it is the important thing to get correct. Because scales on a living thing can be all sorts of messed up and not even, not nice, so that'll all work. As we go along, I actually spend the next couple of days, I think it was a good 5 hours probably, actually going over the entire mask and tracing out exactly where I want all of these scales to go, making sure they are the same sort of pattern, not quite exactly even either side, but just pleasantly symmetrical, but not identical, so the whole thing sort of matches either side. And once I'd actually sketched them all out, made sure there was gouges for all of them, it was a case of going over each and every scale to give it that sort of biological depth, where I would smooth out the edges, round off all the edges, pick out all the bits where a little bit of clay has accumulated, and this was the longest part. This was about 8 hours of the 16 hours that I was sculpting this. It was the biggest time investment, but since my goal here is to try and improve what comes out at the other end of my workflow, I wanted to make sure every single scale on this mask had been touched, had at least 2 passes go over it to make sure it was perfect, make sure every single thing, because I want this to be a nice giant portfolio piece of mine. I want this as a big show-off piece. Hence, I'm doing this for a friend and actually doing it kind of cheap for her because I'm a lovely person and relish the challenge. And in the background here you can actually see my flower pot Groot. He's the Groot flower pot and he is kind of my channel mascot, I guess. I don't know if I can really have somebody else's character as my mascot, but it's the Groot flower pot. And at the moment he is actually my Groot. He's my Groot mystery at the moment. So happy holidays, Merry Christmas and all that. Now you can see in the background that I'm actually doing this sculpt on stream. You can see the chat going, people chatting to me as I'm going through this, trying to share. Now we're getting to the part where I'm adding clay and taking clay away from, sort of going around, cleaning up a lot of the errors that I've made as I'm going along. For some of these errors, like the scales on the forehead were a little bit ropey, and the fin around the back, that involved putting some more clay back on, but trying not to bulk out the anatomy too much, because some parts of the face bit, the clay was getting a bit thin, therefore I was going through to the plaster underneath, which is always a bad sign, because that, if you're making a plaster mould, having raw plaster there will make it harder to demould, it's more likely to crack. Many particularly good reference pictures of the back of the head. The 3D model I was given didn't have the back of the head either, but you could see in a couple of shots that it is actually, it has a different pattern to it. So doing it last, it meant that I learnt that I had all the skills that I learnt from doing the scales for the rest of the head, but also it made sure that my approach to it was actually significantly different from the rest of the face. So I got a different style to it, which I felt and I really like the effect I got from it. And then I scored in a bunch of detail to the neck, even though I don't think I'm going to cast down the neck, but it's just there just in case. Anyway, I hope this has actually been illuminating for you, and here is the final piece spinning in front of you. I'm thrilled with how it comes out. However, this is well beyond my mould making abilities, so we'll see what the actual final prosthetics are like, because let's see if I can actually turn this into anything useful. Thanks for joining me. If you want to see anything else, please stay tuned to the channel, and if you have any questions, just ask. Thanks, and goodbye.